Okay, congratulations to both teams for making it thus far. On side proposition, we have City School Ravi Campus A. On side opposition, we have 55 Main A. And let's also announce the motion. The motion for this round is this House believes that it is against the interest of organized religion to emphasize strict requirements for personal religious commitments, example, not being allowed to work on Sabbath, not eating during Ramadan, and restraining from premarital relationships, etc. Without any further ado, I would like to invite the Prime Minister to take the floor.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are perfectly audible. I am just setting up the timer. All right. Whenever you're ready.
And am I visible now?
Yes, you are now also visible.
All right. Setting up my own timers. I'll be taking my POIs verbally, and I'll be starting in 3, 2, and one. I'll do three things in this speech. Number one, I'll characterize to you what this is actually this looks like, but then I'll give you two arguments as to why this is something that we should follow. And remember, panel, this is an active debate. This is a debate about whether it is in the best interest of this organized religion or not. Moving on to the characterization in this debate. Number one, what does organized religion actually want? We think there's two things. Number one, they want to retain and increase the amount of followers they have in the current space, right? What does this actually look like? We think this is directly in line with the biggest goal, which is to spread their message and get people to convert to that religion. This is why you have, for example, conventions for these religions, why you have these Q&A sessions in the first place. But then secondly, and this is also really important, we think these are religions that want their followers to be devoted to an extent. They want people that adhere to the core principles. And what do these core principles look like? This looks like, for example, Tawheed in Islam or the Trinity in Christianity, and truly believe into them. We think this is something that's really important because they want these people to follow their religions out of their free will and not because they're being told to do so, right? But then secondly, what does the target audience slash subscribers actually look like for these religions? I think this is also twofold. Number one, there are people that are apathetic to these religions, people that do not actually believe in them in the first place. The end goal here is to try to influence them, relay these sort of values to them, and get them to convert. For example, for Islam, this could be a white man living in Florida, or for Christianity, this could be someone living in Pakistan, etc. We think these are people, and in this, we think there are two kinds of people. But then secondly, the idea of how you have people that are born into the religion itself. There are two kinds of people like that. Number one, there are people that eventually do, question the religion out of the restrictions imposed on them. Am I doing the things am I doing, for example, fasting, etc.? Does this actually benefit me, etc.? But then secondly, the kind of people that mindlessly follow their religions, we think this is something that's not really relevant. But thirdly, I show the idea on what these strict requirements actually look like and what this is emphasis look like, and this is something that's really important in this debate. Number one, these requirements. This is, for example, like you not eating in Ramadan, you're not using electronics on Sabbath, etc., and you're keeping kosher at all times, etc. But then, what does this emphasis then look like that is currently present in status quo? This looks like three things. Number one, you have threatening narratives that are imposed by and propagated by these leaders, such as if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell. If you don't fast, if you eat while you're fasting, you're probably going to have to pay a lot of money, etc. We think this also looks like you get ostracized by religious communities if you don't do these actions. For example, if I am caught eating in Ramadan, I'm likely to have people stare at me a long time, and they're probably going to consider me a lost god or something like that. But thirdly, this also includes really harmful labels on people. For example, calling people in Islam kafirs, etc., which is something that's really grave in its nature, right? Because this is something that shows to the other people that you are not a part of the rest religion. That's something that harms people in of it themselves. But then two arguments in this debate from us, right, as to how we need to more buy-in for organized religion during this. And notice, because this is one of the goals, and if I proved this to you, I think we've been half of the debate there, right? But then how do people actually react to organized religious narratives in the first place? Number one, you have apathetic people. We think there's two things that happen. These are people that find it extreme. Why? Because they see that this is a curb on their bodily autonomy, a curb on their freedom. Because of these religious practices being such impositions on them, they're likely to not buy into them because they think this is something that harms their freedom and bodily autonomy. This happens because these practices that exist in each religion are unique to them. And hence, for these people, it is considered as something that is very alienated, right? For example, a white man in Florida is likely to think that fasting and not eating is something that's really weird because he does not actually get used to that, right? But then, secondly, how these people find it unnecessary. What does that really mean? That means when you have these narratives and labels existing on the trade off, these people they like to make a rational choice. And because they don't want to get labeled as a kafir, etc., they don't want to face the wrath of these trade offs, they find this trade off very hard to accept. But also, notice how in many countries you do not have accommodating structures. In, for example, in the USA, you do not have, you do not have holidays off for Eid, etc. And as these people find that trade off hard as well because they don't want to lose out on their jobs because they don't want to, lose that sort of freedom. They don't want to abide by these restrictions. Why are these both? Why are both of these problems really important? We think a lot of it, like I already explained to you, why this is something that's really important. But also, this is important because the chance of them being able to convert, etc., is something that's really low right now. Why? Because of the kind of laws you have in the status quo in different countries. For example, you have the hijab ban in France. You don't have holidays available, etc. And hence, that chance of them being able to convert on top of with these added restrictions on top is something that's really low. But why is this really important? We think humans hate being told what to do, right? We want to, as humans, have some sort of control over our life. We want to feel in charge of our own selves. Then, on our side, well, how do we create more buy-in from them? We think on our side, well, emphasis is one that is placed on other things. For example, your history, your core values, etc. What does that actually mean? This looks like you explain the importance of Tawheed in Islam. You explain the importance of belief in one God, etc. And you emphasize on the Trinity in Christianity, etc. The reason there is enough differentiation that existing for each religion is because each of these core values for each of them is something that's really unique. People will comparatively be more open to these ideas now because you don't actually take away their freedoms. There are two possibilities that exist, right? Number one, people become more aware of these core values and they want to be a follower because they generally have this sort of inclination already existing, right? And also now these are people that are also likely to fulfill these sort of strict requirements. Why? Because they want to, not because it was something that is imposed onto them. And this is something that generally we see in society. Even if we want to do something and it's something that people propagate on us or impose on us, we're likely to shy away from that. We're likely to not want to do that. But in the instance, it is our choice. We would likely to do that, right? But then secondly, kind of people, but the kind of people that don't buy into these values, right? At least on our side of the world, these are people that are not alienated in the status quo. For example, how you see non-Muslims react to the hijab compulsion, right? But then the second kind of people, how people into that are born to a religion are far better off on our side. Some people they start questioning the religion, meaning that they're becoming hesitant in the status quo. What is that? Why is that exactly written? They begin to grow this resentment towards things that are being forced to do so, right? For example, when they're told if you don't pray, you're likely to go to hell. While this is true within a lot of religions, a lot of people would prefer praying without being forced to do so. Okay? Eventually, what happens is they either opt out of the religion or they start getting this deep resentment for it. A lot of them what that leads to is that a lot of them actually start believing this is important and bad because it harms the goals of that religion. Right? What happens on our side of the world? These people they are not forced to pray, etc. But instead they're taught the core values for example, of Tawheed, etc., which are things that are emphasized by their families, communities, etc., with a breakdown of these narratives. This will either make them do these requirements out of their own will at all. Also, on our worst case, what happens is they don't do these actions, but only and label them religious. Even in that instance, we would prefer this to someone who follows and resents. Why? Because now it's not tokenistic and still a genuine connection. The impact of this is quite simple. You have more buy-in for non-religious people and less buy-in for people born into it. Before I move on, any points?
Do you think that these personal religious practices can be alienated from the core beliefs of those religions themselves?
I don't think necessarily it has to align with the core beliefs and the idea. Like this is something I already explained to how the core beliefs are quite different from these practices, right? We think these practices are probably just some sort of representation of these beliefs a further extent, right? But then a second argument as to how this leads to a greater depth of support. We think following a religion means aligning yourself with its core, right? Every religion has some sort of exclusivity existing with it. For example, Tawhid Islam, like I already explained to you. The problem with status quo is quite simple. People don't think about why they're following a religion. They just do so tokenistically and to try to tick off all the boxes because other people are also doing the same thing. Why is this true? Two reasons. Number one, by emphasizing unquestioning extreme actions, what happens is organized religion ends up discouraging introspection into that religion itself. This is something that would be more on our side because now people are more curious about the religion they're following and without and without becoming less tokenistic followers, right? We think people who only do this action without knowing this are the ones that do not even count as followers, right? But then secondly, as how people treat religion with less hostility now. We now, when you do not have this sort of strict parameters and practices that exist that are existing, but it's something that's packed and sent to you as as an ideology, there's a lesser reluctance from people to generally buy into that. The impact of this is also quite simple. You have better support for that religion itself. People learn about the religion more, and hence the kind of followingship you develop for that religion is something that's more better. And at the end of the day, followers feel that they're not being imposed. This is something that's not imposed onto them, and they're rather much happier on our side. Give it to Prop.
Can I have 30 seconds?
Yeah, 30 seconds, please.
Yes, you can have 30 seconds.
Am I visible and audible? Am I audible?
Yes, you're visible and audible. Just 1 second, मेरा internet थोड़ा problem है.
Okay.
Okay, can you test your audio now? I want to check again.
Okay, I'll just read the motion. This House believes that it is against the interest of organized religion to emphasize strict requirements for personal religious commitments.
Yes, now it's perfect.
Okay, I'll take POIs in the chat.
Okay, we'll start the timer as soon as you're ready.
Okay. I'll be starting my speech in. Wait, actually, I need to turn my fan off. Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. At the point in time where religion is something that has always been based on strict adherence, has always had strict guidelines. I think it is like very, very vital for you to tell the people about these guidelines, never been trodden to approach. Like 3 things they told us before I like move on to my speech. Firstly, the idea of like free will. Secondly, the idea of like strict like values, and then the idea of like deep resentment. I'll take like all 3 ideas down. Firstly, I like the idea of free will. I think like we aren't living in like the 1900s or anything where you are like forced to convert into a religion. I think that's like a really unfair idea for them to run. But even if I like buy into it, the idea that you telling these people about these values is like equating to like forcing these people to join this religion, huge like gap I think in their analysis. By the way, I think religious identity at the end of the day is something that will always be rooted in your personal beliefs of the religion. Why is that? Because I can be born into a house that is religion, but unless I believe in that religion, they cannot force me to follow those values. They cannot force me to believe in the religion. They can tell me to pray and I might, but they don't know. You can't like force me to pray. But even if you force me to pray, you don't know what I'm saying on like when I'm standing on that prayer mat. Insofar as like I don't believe in that, I don't make that personal choice. I don't think that's like something that's like a choice that you can like force on me, right? I think religion is something that will always be deep rooted in like personal belief. I don't think you can but then I think we on our side we think that's like so better because you encourage these people. And I'll talk about the like second idea, right? The idea that, oh, you need to talk about the like core principles of their value of like this religion. What was their example? Tawheed. What are other like core five pillars of Islam? Let's think about that. Oh yeah, Ramadan, the thing that they're so against and think is like forcing these people. I think they're like confused then, right? Because they think you telling these people that they need to fast is like you creating this threatening narrative that is forcing these people. No, this is the narrative that the religion tells you. It is the core belief of the religion. Your religion is the one who tells you that hey, if you're not fasting, you will go to hell. You need to do these and these things. You're not spreading threatening narratives. You're spreading realistic narratives of what this religion actually looks like. You're telling these people and encouraging them into like what will happen and why these need to follow these narratives. Something I like elaborate on in my like positive case. But then the idea of like deep resentment, right? I think deep resentment only like occurs in the point like you don't have a choice, something that I've already like taken down. But even if I like buy this idea that you have like deep resentment, I think deep resentment, and then let's look at this, right? If I am a person who has already like entered into a religion, I don't think you telling me that like, oh, hey, your religion requires you to fast or else you're going to hell is going to create like deep resentment for the religion simply because you also buy into this belief. This is like a choice that you cooperatively made. But even if I like buy into the other idea that like you have to give away your right, I think that's like a consented idea that you take. Going into a religion, I know that hey, I am going to focus on my religious like rights and not my worldly rights because my religious rights are what are more important to me. That's it. That if I have to make the trade-off between oh, like people in society will think I am not like wearing a burqa and that is bad from right, but I know that this is my Islamic right and Islamic principle. I think that like, on that way, the Islamic principle becomes important. But also, I don't think they can debate like this or simply on like people who are being like who are like converting into the religion. I think this debate is about mainly like people who already like believe this religious values and have already like bought into the values of this religion. They need to like go on to this and like debate it. But also the idea that heaven is like your reward, right? The reason we all buy into this narrative and do these things is simply because these people want the reward of heaven. This is not like a threatening narrative. These are literally core principles. Moving on to then my positive case. Before that, I'll take a point.
When all religions came about, the initial values that all prophets instilled were the values like humanity, like equality, etc. All the practices like prayers, Ramadan, etc. came later. Engage.
I don't know what how that has anything to do with the chat because like if we're talking about like religious commitments, I think these are still like core values within your principle. We think equality like doesn't mean that you can't like fast and thing. I think these are things that like go hand in hand. But also if like insofar as your focus is on like the religious like commitments like fasting and prayer, I think that becomes like the first thing that you focus on when you enter religion in society right now. But then what does organized religion look like, right? We think these are like structured systems of beliefs and practices that are centered around like specific sets of like religious doctrinations, things like the Korah, things like Quran, right? We think there are then like three important parts of organized religions. Firstly, the existence of like structural hierarchies and institutions such as like the Catholic Church or like masjids where like you follow the rules of the doctrine that was given to you. Secondly, that these are tight knit communities where like gatherings and formations become very important. You constantly meet for like commitments. Thirdly, the emphasis on like standards and preservation, so you like people don't stray away from these religions. What is then like the issue, right? The issue then becomes that there's currently like a breakdown of religion going on, right? Where we see like Scientological cults being formed, and we see like breakdown within religions also that like take away from the core values of this religion. We then think religious communities are like become so important because they like instill these values. They constantly talk about it, but also they remind you of your endpoint. That these are values that you have to adhere to insofar as you want to get into heaven or hell. But then also like we think that then like adhering and like reminding these people of the pillars of religion becomes so important. My first line then on like sanctity and dilution of religion, right? Understand that like it's very like the importance of like religious requirements becomes so important, right? That is to say that like your religion is something that is being shaped by your followers, like your sense of community when you all get together, right? We think it is then in like the interest of the religion to like make sure the structure stays and like the people's emphasis on following their religious commitments stays so important. Why is this then important? Simply because of the fact that reminding people that they need to fast, reminding people about like Sabbath, things like this are things that remind you of the right path. They remind you of your endpoint, right? They like make sure you don't like stray away and do like sins that you will end up later regretting in your life. They like remind you of what is important. We think then like the de-emphasis of this like narrative is something that is so harmful for like three reasons. A, we think religions like lose their foundation insofar as you stop like paying attention to the core principles of their values, the things that are like written down in their doctrinations, etc. But we think you take away like the solidarity and consolidation that exists within these narratives within these religious communities that say that I am fasting, but there's like a whole community of people that fast with me. I care about this people because we follow the same thing. But then also we think that these insofar as you lose like organization within religion, you also lose like purpose of religion because there's no like one sect path to follow. And this brings me into my like other line about the breakdown of communities. This takes down their like line about otherization also, right? We think that these religions have been like for always been formed around like the idea of communities that say that they're like homogenized communities that exist within getting together. Organized religions also like emphasize on getting together as religions, like for example for like spreading of these narratives, or like you get together and talk about religion. These are how you like create solidarities, and like a strong sense of like community then becomes so important for like adherence, right? Why do you then like lose this sense on their side, right? Simply because you like you lose like the depth of your belief if you're not like like validating being like validated in goods, right? We think the the like internal way religion works is very like it's like dependent on the devoted people that exist within these religions like exist, right? But also we think this devotion is so important within your religion. Why is that? Simply because your religion tells you that you are being put into this world to test your faith. All of this is a test of faith for like your endpoint, right? We think it's then also the duty of these like religion organized religions to make sure you are reminded that this is why you're here, this is a test of your faith, and you need to like adhere to these values, you need to pass this test in order to get to like the endpoint that you have created, right? But also then how you like have a constant reminder and connection when you are like connected to these regions, right? That is say you are now a collective community. Insofar you have any like doubts, you have people you can talk to, but also there are people who constantly like remind you of what is right and what is wrong. If you are doing something that goes against religion, there are people who exist who will tell you that you need to like make sure that you're staying on the right path. You need to make sure that you keep these communities. You have someone who's like holding you accountable for like not doing these things, but also you have people who you can talk to insofar as you like have doubts. But then thirdly, the idea that like you have people who like guide you, right? That say that this is not something, they don't enforce you that you have to fast. They tell you why fasting is so meaningful in the first place. They like build this narrative for you, and they emphasize on like the core principles of religion that like bring you, right? We think insofar as you don't do this, you like lose the community sense, but also people like start de-emphasizing religion and they lose this narrative. Insofar as they aren't like talking about like people who actually are in this religion, insofar as they literally talk about core principles, I think we already won this debate.
Thank you for that fine speech. I'd now like to invite the second proposition speaker to take the floor.
Can I have 15 seconds?
Yes.
Am I visible? Audible?
Yes, you're audible and visible.
I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. The first thing I'm going to do is school opposition on debate strategy. There's 3 things I want you to note. 1, their most important definitional clash in this debate was the linkage between beliefs and practices. Essentially, they want to co-opt all of our analysis by painting out religious practices like praying or fasting to be an extension of these core principles of a religion. Let's define what these practices actually are. I think these practices are an outlet or a mechanism to show why individuals opt into a particular religion, to showcase that they are conditioned to believe in some form of core principle. Let's look at their examples. I think that things like prayer and fasting are an outlet for believing in essential core principles like self sacrifice and the ability to give time to your religion. And so far as that is true, I don't necessarily think that the belief in a particular religion, the history of that religion, and why that religion is the way it is exclusively linked to these practices. Secondly, this isn't a policy debate. I want you to note this debate is about the way that organized religions are structured, and this alternative happens in a world where organized religion does not place that much emphasis on these practices being as tied to beliefs as they are in opposition's model. But secondly, It's not like people don't know that these practices are important or that these practices exist on our side of the house either. It's about priority. It's about the emphasis or the narratives that these organized religions are giving. Because insofar as both the people that are apathetic about a religion and want to learn more about it and are potentially going to convert, as well as the people that are born into a family that follows a particular religion, will still know that fasting and praying is a thing. I think that we give even greater meaning to these actions insofar there is intention behind it, not just something that you do because you see other people doing it. But let's look at how they engaged with our case, right? One, our argument on how you gain more support from both apathetic individuals because you give them grounds to convert without all of those tangible restrictions in places where they might not be able to fulfill all those tangible restrictions. And secondly, as well as people that are born into places that are already religious. They gave us two responses to this, right? One, people aren't forced to convert. I think this is a straw manning of what we told you on apathetic individuals, because we didn't tell you that they're forced to convert in the status quo, but what we told you is that there's a reluctance for individuals to convert when the only marketing of religion they see is something that strips them of their individuality, something that strips them of their right and their ability to exercise this religion. And second, they didn't engage on this idea that we live in an increasingly globalized world. In the majority of places, you don't have access to things like, I don't know, mosques or something that allow you to fulfill all of these prerequisite conditions. And so far as there is so many of them in religions like Islam, I think that makes it even harder for apathetic individuals to actually opt in. And the reason that they're an important stakeholder in this debate is because remember, all religious movements want to increase the number of followers that they have, not just retain the ones that are already existent. Secondly, I think that individuals are forced if you place that much individuals are actually forced if you place that much emphasis on practices as well, right? Because if you place that much emphasis on practices, you're essentially telling an individual that if they don't opt into some particular mechanism that they may not be able to maybe fulfill if they live in like a Western country or something, they are inherently a bad person. I think that that leads to even more hostility towards a particular religion. I think that that leads to individuals opting out as well. Secondly, then the argument we gave you on depth of support, they gave us a number of responses here, right? One, people already consent to religions, therefore this is not a breach of their autonomy. Again, that's not the argument we gave you. The argument we gave you is that individuals are inherently reluctant to buy into this religion. The individuals are hesitant to buy into this religion in the first place because the very first thing that they see in the religion is that they want to strip you of your ability to maybe not want to pray or not want to fast. I think that even if an individual is to do all of these things, they should come about through their own intention, not being told to do so as the first exposure that you have to that religion, right? Then this idea of rewarding and narratives, right? How individuals are apparently shown this flowery picture of heaven, and that is the motivation for them to do these things. I don't think that's true. I think that religions inherently use fear as their greatest motivator. The comparative between heaven and hell is given in such a way that if you don't fulfill all of these prerequisite conditions, regardless of your ability to, if you don't fulfill all of these prerequisite conditions, you're going to go to hell. I think that that sort of fear is something that also sort of turns people away from actually these religions in the first place. Fifthly, again, they didn't engage with this idea of globalization, this idea of how not all individuals have the capacity to fulfill all these restrictions. And so far as all these restrictions are growing, I don't necessarily see how you get more people opting in there either. And that's how they dealt with our case then. But let's look at what they argued, right? One, they recharacterized the issue of this debate as the breakdown of religion. Let's see why the breakdown of religion actually exists. I think it exists because individuals who are already religious are starting more and more to question their religion because of their exposure to greater ideas outside as well, right? Individuals are influenced by the media telling them that they are forced to do a particular thing because they never learned the reason that they do that particular thing in the first place. And so far as you maybe have a 15-year-old in Pakistan going onto the internet and learning for the first time that praying 5 times a day isn't something that is objectively the right thing to do, but this is just something that you were told and weren't ever given the reason for. At that point in time, I think individuals are more likely to opt out because you never inculcated the intention to do those actions within them in the first place. Second, this idea of how you give individuals the reminders to do objectively right things as an organized religious movement. A few responses here. One, no, I think that the majority of narratives that tell people to do these practices exist in a vacuum. You don't tell an individual that they have to fast because it inculcates a sense of, I don't know, self-sacrifice in them. You tell individuals in Pakistan they have to fast because everyone else is doing it. And if you don't, then you're a kafir, you're a bad person. Second, even if they did tell the intention behind doing these actions, I think that you still I think that the if your first step towards telling an individual to follow a religion is the outlet for some belief that they are not actually ever taught, at that point in time, I don't see how that support is any better off on their side. On our side, on the other hand, you have more meaningful actions. Why is that so? Because even if an individual does not learn about these practices as their very first exposure to that religion, I think the majority of individuals, if they do choose to opt in because their personal beliefs align with the core beliefs of that religion, they will want to uh, opt into these practices eventually because that then gives them an outlet for those beliefs, right? Lastly, then this idea of
Points.
community, I think that's inexclusive on either side of the house. I think this happens in a world where instead of emphasizing all of these practices, you emphasize something else. I think that community of still exists on our side. Yeah, sure.
Do you think like religions diluting their principles to attract more followers is like okay?
I don't think religions are diluting their principles. I think that religions are just changing the priority in which they expose people to that religion in the first place. Because insofar as people still know that praying and fasting is something that is important, but the reason to do so is now given to them rather than it being that everyone else around you is doing. I think that religions are more diluted on our side of the house. Why? Because we don't frame people that are following religions for the sake of following that religion since they were born as actual followers. Insofar as all of those practices are tokenistic on your side of the house and people are just following it for the sake of following it, I don't think that you can frame these people as genuine followers, even if they are doing all of those physical prerequisites. But then my own positive case on how religions lose and how religions become exploited and changed in the status quo. Why is this true? I think that because strict requirements are there, this gives local religious leaders the ability to change what these strict requirements look like. Why is this true? One, I think religious leaders like to go on power trips, especially in localized areas. They exploit this power and create even more strict requirements, things like, I don't know, paying money to absolve yourself of sin, or I don't know, like dam wala pani or something. I think that leads to more ignorant misinterpretation of religion in and of itself. I think the religion loses all of its meaning and its original purpose insofar as if you give so many strict requirements, then adding one in if you are a religious leader does not seem that significant because you are allowed to do so if your religion is defined by all of these strict requirements. At that point is true. At that point in time, I think the impact of this is that religions retain their trueness on our side of the house. They retain their objectivity because the essence of the religion is not within all of these enforced strict requirements that religious leaders can change or manipulate. At that point in time, because we lead to more followers and more genuine followers, and because religions don't change on our side of the house, very clear problem.
Thank you for that fine speech. I'd now like to call upon the second opposition speaker to take the floor. Yes, you can have 30 seconds. Before you start, just give me your heads up. Okay, I can start the timer.
I'll be starting my speech in three, two, one. I want you to note exactly how very cleverly side proposition has made this debate about the people who are going to be converting to organized religions and how that they're the main stakeholder. Let me re-emphasize the motion. Says that when you're against the interest of organized religion to emphasize strict requirements for personal religious commitments. This is to say it applies to everyone, not just the people who you're propagating the emphasis upon, but also people who are already following your faith. This also applying on people who are already there, who've been there forever, who are already born into it, and the people who are converting to. Now, a few clarifications before starting off. Firstly, when you're going to say that, oh, I need people to convert, I need apathetic people to convert with the religion, guys, you know there are different marketing strategies, right? So like you don't necessarily go the way Maruf and Mustafa are like, oh my god, you're going to tell these people they're going to go to hell and then no one wants to join. No, you understand that if Islam has a certain image, you want to go up that image. You want to be like, hey, you know what? That's not what it is. We think that if you join Islam, you're going to get into divorce. You're going to heaven. We give you proper actual positive re-incentives to join the religion. That's necessarily how it goes. Currently, in the United States of America, Islam has an extremely high conversion rate as opposed to a lot of other times, right? Which is at the point where these personal restrictions are already emphasized within the religion. So I don't necessarily understand exactly why people are so against positive reinforcement done for marketing of the religion that you're against. So I do think it was really unfair to them to just strawman it towards you, just threatening people. Guys, sorry you grew up in a really religiously strict household. That's not how it usually works in a lot of instances. But also note how they're really running away from the entire burden that they have to actually cater to the entire population or the entire purpose of this debate. Because understand what then is the main interest of organized religion. I'm going to take Muntar Mustafa's idea of globalization here, right? The idea that currently you live in a world which is so disconnected, which is so but polarized in so many aspects. You live in an unstable world where there's so many atheists, where there's so many cults, where there's so much uncertainty. I think at that point in time, the main purpose that organized religion has is not to go into the globalization, but it is the idea that you want to stick to the very core principles that you stood by forever. It's the idea that you want to remain unified, you want to remain stable, you want to remain at that force that is unbreakable. I think at that point, the main interest of these people is not to bring in 1,000 new followers, because we don't live in the dawn of Islam when you need 1 billion other people, right? When you already have 2 billion people following the religion. I feel like the main reason that you then have is actually to increase the depth of the religious followers, because the depth and the devoutness of your followers which then increases the stability of your religion within this globalized unstable community, right? So I do think at the point in time where we do agree and we think that focusing on these core principles and core values, which by the way are literally interconnected with the belief system that they're trying to push aside from it, we do end up winning this debate. But then before that, let me just talk about the three main ideas of this debate, which I'm going to be characterizing into issues. First of all, the idea of how you're going to be bringing more followers and everything. Secondly, the idea of how it's about humans don't necessarily like being told what to do. But then thirdly, the idea of whether or not you have more community in this part of the house. And I'm also going to be tackling Mustafa's line fragment that. But before that, sure, I'll take POI.
If Islam is growing more in the US, a country where there is less emphasis placed on these physical prerequisites,
Sit
where do you
down. There
think?
is no emphasis placed on them. Okay, I've literally sat inside mosques where in the United States of America they preach religion. These people are actually alluding to. Okay, no, I'm going to discuss this in my class. The idea first idea then exactly how what exactly do people want? Do they want choice or do they want stability in this entire life? They say people in this world are alienated towards religion because, oh my God, you have A, threatening narratives, but B, they're really intimidated by the entire idea of the strict requirements placed on them. I would like to know, first of all, these strict requirements are quite present in your doctrine. These strict requirements are present and told to you by God. And you necessarily, in the end of the day, believe in them because of that. So I think it is inherently morally wrong for you as any religious organization to go up against something that you've stuck with for all this time. Because to understand that point, you will be reducing the emphasis on it within your own religious bodies. It is not a momentary thing that you're trying to put here. So you need to justify exactly why it's all right for you to compromise on hundreds of years of you actively promoting these moral principles in relation to these beliefs. Understand here. Come on, tell me that okay, you need to actually more attract these people because of the disunity that's been created because the people being scared of your religion. I think that's inherently untrue because these people want the stability that your religion provides. So it's in the interest of you to attract the stable people, to attract people who are already disillusioned with the world. So I do think at that point in time where you place emphasis on these personal religious commitments, you create a sense of community for them, which promotes them to actually sit down and be like, hey, you know what? This community welcomes me. You have hundreds of people who are praying Ramzan. Praying Ramzan, who are fasting during Ramzan. You have hundreds of people over there who are in a community. This community is what attracts these people because then you're not alone in what you're doing. I think this is essentially what is really important for you to co-opt into this religion in its first self. So I do think we do end up taking that on our side of the house, even greater than they do, as opposed to whatever propagation that they're trying to bring in by strawmanning this entire debate. The idea that they have that these people, in the end of the day, this entire the narration of religion, then these people becomes alienated. Wow. First of all, alienation is something that is not inherent to the way that you emphasize on your actual, the practices within your religion. For instance, people don't necessarily hate Christianity because it tells you that, oh my God, you have to go to church every Sunday. No, it hates it because the persecution and religious persecution that happened along history. I don't think those two narratives are actually, inherently there. So that's an extreme gap there. You have to link exactly why the religious practices would make people alienate people of certain religions. But I don't necessarily think people will alienate you because of this, because you create that sense of community that I've told you about multiple times at that side of the house, right? But then also understand exactly what Aisha told you, right? She told you that at the point in time where you actively have all these values, which are core principles within your religion, these inherently align with the belief system that Maruf was telling you. So what the point where you're saying, okay, but Tawheed is the main thing of Islam, understand there are four other pillars. So I don't think any person who actually co-opts into your religion at this point in time will be able to cater to the rest of the four principles when the first belief or there isn't there. You're saying, oh, but no, they believe in it in the first place, and then later onwards you'll be fine with following the rest of their practices. No, because if you as a religious community as a whole are de-emphasizing the religious commitment that you're going to be co-opting into, then I don't think at that point in time you are not going to be following them in the longer run either. So I don't think then you can actually emphasize, tell me that, oh, but they're going to follow it later. No, they're not. You're not emphasizing it at all. You're telling them it is okay if you don't fast. That way, I don't necessarily care if you don't go to heaven or hell. I will become even more complacent as someone who's even a part of this religious community, as someone who's co-opting into this religious community. I don't think at that point in time, the entire idea of alienation and the idea of how these people will still be following it in the end of grave fall. Entire dilution that you then have of religion, fragmentation on their side of the house, which is what we've been trying to explain to you the entire time. When you break down the values throughout the entire system, which haven't, by the way, still engage with, do engage in it at third, right? You then end up fragmenting the entire purpose of religion as a whole, which is based on the community, since everyone is now following different things. Someone fasts and Ramadan, someone's like, it's okay if I don't. Someone goes to church every Sunday, someone's like, it's okay. You reduce the community, you reduce the fragmentation, you reduce the belief system that you have, which is inherently connected to Ramzan. For instance, if Ramzan shows you discipline, you're going to be like, some people can follow the discipline, others cannot. I do think at that point time it takes it down. But then also the entire idea of Mustafa about like how it basically creates all this ignorant people. I'm actually going to take this at its best on my LOA, right? The idea that you give a lot of misinformation. I think misinformation increases on your side of the house because my line of argument essentially tells you that the point where you create the entire fragmentation that they still haven't dealt with, please do deal with it. You create the entire fragmentation through the very diverse different sets of belief that you then propagate into the star idea through the individualistic things. Then the people who are already part of your religion, who are really, really devout, get scared. We see this happening right now when the neoliberal values scare people stuck inside the current communities. So, for instance, if you live in a really secular household, or if you live in like really secular area with madrasas, etc., these people are scared that people around you are losing faith in the religion and its very core principles and beliefs. At that point in time, they will start propagating even more persecutory things on your side of the house. They will start spreading misinformation just for the people to stick to the religion. We think as a whole, if you as an organized community place the emphasis in a nicer manner, that way these people won't necessarily feel the need to put on this persecution. I think at that point in time, we do cater to the entire idea of misinformation because that is only created once you create entire fragmentation on your side of the house. So long as you don't actually concede that the fragmentation will be happening, I do not think side proposition can win this debate. Clear margin for 55.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. I'd now like to call upon the third proposition speaker to take the floor.
Can I have 30 seconds, please?
Yes.
Am I visible and audible?
Yes, you are both visible and audible.
Okay. You'll start the timer, right? So I will
Yes.
have the timer. Okay. Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Three clarifications before we move on to the issues of this debate. Number one, on the frame of this debate. Understand that this is a debate that is happening in current context, but this does not specifically mean that this is a change that we're going to be making now. So it does not mean that we're suddenly going to change the Quran. We're now going to suggest that that there needs to be like less emphasis that has been put on fasting, prayer as prerequisite for heaven, etc. So this debate is happening specifically in a world where initially and where in like all circumstances these religions believe that there needs to be like no emphasis on fasting, prayers, and as prerequisites for heaven, etc. So I think their entire analysis on how the identity is distorted because these religions originally wanted to have fasting, hajj, or prayer as prerequisites, etc., is like taken away from the debate, right? But then secondly, on whether beliefs and practices are like interconnected. Understand that they're fairly segregated. In fact, you're confusing them in the first place, right? Because understand that Tawheed is an article of faith and namaz, hajj, etc. are like pillars of Islam, right? So understand all the pillars of Islam on our side of the house, where all we're trying to suggest is that the pillars of Islam are going to have like much less value. So things like hajj, etc., things like som and like namaz, etc., are going to have like much less value. What will have the most value then? The articles of faith. What are the articles of faith? Belief in God, belief in angels, belief in messengers, etc. I think the true essence of religion is still going to exist on our side of the house. I'll further explain this in my issues, right? But then thirdly, on the globalized and capitalistic context that they're trying to ignore within this debate. Because understand this debate is not happening in a vacuum, and there's a need for this debate that they're trying to undermine, right? I think that Mustafa in his speech tried to explain to you that why the breakdown of religion has occurred because of like very specific reasons. And the reason we're having this debate is because we want to cater to that breakdown of religion, but they simply decided not to engage to that, right? Then on to the issues of this debate. Number one, the most important issue: on which side are we going to have like most amount of followers, right? This is the most important issue because both sides mutually agree on it, right? But then also because of the current context. Understand that we live in a globalized society where there are increased number of difficulties in life to the point that people have started to leave religions. Okay, you might say statistically people are not leaving religions. Even if they're not leaving religions, despite that, people have started to follow the religions less. They think that they are not a part of the religion. Even if I might call myself a Muslim because I don't commit like because I don't pray like 5 times a day, I have ultimately been like disconnected or ostracized from the Muslim community. If I like show up to the to like the masjid one day and ask my imam like a philosophical question about Islam, he'll likely ask me that do you pray 5 times a day? I think that is the kind of community we exist in, right? Because you need to understand that the circumstances in which this debate is happening, because they don't understand it. I'm going to ground it further on two levels. Number one, on economic levels, because understand that inflation is at an all-time high. So what this means is that once you finally raise enough money for a trip to take your family on a vacation to Hawaii, now everyone tells you that because you have enough money, you need to go on Hajj instead. That is the kind of choices that you have to make here. The reason we are having this debate is because it has become so difficult to follow the practices suggested in Islam, the compulsions that are being pushed onto you by Islam. But more minimally, you earn like a least amount of income, but then you have to give sadaqah in order for you to protect your family. But then further on, if you have like just a certain amount of
Point, sir.
equivalent amount of like silver, etc., then you need to give like zakat, etc. When you're not able to like go by on yourself, when your own family is in trouble, then you have to prioritize all of these other things. You have to ultimately decrease your standard of living. Why so? Because this so-called concept of
Sir.
religion wants you to do so. What happens if you don't do that? You'll be ostracized within the society. And I think this is something that they also continue to ignore within this debate. They think that everyone in the current world has the choice or not, whether they want to or not, whether they want to pursue it or not. I'll tell you why this choice does not exist. Because continuously on your side of the house, people are being pushed actively that you have no choice, because your family will tell you that you need to pursue certain things, your society will tell you that you need to pursue certain things, your religious leaders will tell you that you need to pursue certain things.
Sir.
I think if the importance is being given to such an extent, then what happens is that you have two choices. A, you either leave that religion or just isolate yourself from the religion, or you still be a part of the religion and follow all the practices that have been pushed onto you. But then secondly, on a societal level as well, because understand that there are jobs because of which you cannot commit to like Sabbath, etc. So things like you having to work on a Friday or on a Saturday, these are things that are not allowed by the religion, but are like sort of like compulsions that you have to follow. So for example, you like wanting to have like namaz breaks in the United States, etc. understand that most etc may be present in like some places but not like every place, right? But then also because religions exist on a spectrum, right? So Islam in itself is like an organized religion that has a lot of following, and you're only debating this on your like best case scenario. I think for religions that are like less followed etc, organized religions like Judaism etc, that have like less that have like less of a community around the world, I think this becomes like much more prevalent, because for you to be able to do these practices means that you have to actively isolate yourself from the society. What happens is, then because we live in a
Sir,
society in which everything's been so globalized and because everything's been so capitalistic, is then people begin to judge you on these metrics. So then you cannot actively involve or associate with any community that you have, any community on any other basis, because of the religion practices, because of these personal commitments to religion that you're going to have to follow, right? So what that means is that ultimately on the metric of like where you're going to have like many followers, they're losing this debate, right? So that is exactly why the breakdown of religion is happening. The breakdown of religion
Paul.
is simply because people cannot follow, right? But then secondly, on devoted followers, I think they are someone who will want to follow and practice everything, so in like either side of the house. So I think that on devoted followers, this is a debate that sort of becomes like symmetric, right? But before I move on short,
If following religious obligations and practices is so hard, would you rather people just leave their religion?
that is exactly why we're having this debate, right? Because I don't think that people should leave the religion because following these practices is so hard. Because we as a religion want the numerics to be high. I don't understand what was the point of that, given that I'd spent like 6 minutes on that issue itself, right? But then on to communities. What do these communities look like that they're trying to emphasize to you is so important? The foundation of these was so important. You're just forced to sit there because you have to give into actions that you simply did not voluntarily opt into. So I think that the value of community that it has for individuals decreases. Even if you as a religion can gather a certain amount of people that are there for it, that are there in your like in your communal hearings, I don't think that there's certain value attached to it. Why so? Because even if you're able to gather them, I don't think that you if there's certain action required, you'll be able to like push them to take that action, etc. But in the current circumstance, they don't tell us what this action looks like, because I don't think you go out on like religious wars, etc., right? Because I don't think that like all of these things exist in like the current world, etc. So then what is the value of these communities to this religion as well? Not emphasized throughout, right? But then also because you need to understand that we accommodate to these communities more, because now all individuals are a part of these community. All you need to do is you need to have the prerequisite belief that an individual can have. So these communities become more inclusive and are like better on our side of the house, because you gain like more numerical support, right? But then also then lastly on the identity of religion, understand it does not get distorted simply because of the prioritization that a religion has, that we try to bring to you in a POI that you simply didn't try to answer, right? Because we try to tell you that that when religions came about in the first place, the first thing that comes about is the articles of faith. So what things you need to believe, and so far as they've not established a connection with how these practices are essential for the beliefs to be maintained, and how the beliefs cannot be maintained in isolation to the practices, they cannot simply take away the identity of a religion as well. For all those reasons, vote proposition. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. I'd now like to invite the third opposition speaker to take the floor. You can have 30 seconds to set up.
All right, am I visible and audible? Is there any glitch? Okay. Maybe it's me. Right. Starting my speech in three, two, one. I think if you ever want to learn how to strawman a debate, how to be completely disingenuous and completely disregard the entire thing we've been running across three speakers, I think you should learn that from TCS Ravi, right? Because there are a couple of important clarifications that I need to make right off the bat. The reason that they will also not be winning this debate, because they've completely deprioritized the burdens that they were supposed to have in this entire debate. I think since first, we've been telling you that the purpose of organized religion isn't inherently what they've been telling you. By the way, if I can reshift what the purpose of organized religion is in the first place, all of their arguments about how you attract more people to your religion inherently fall, right? But then, why is the purpose of organized religion not to increase the amount of people, but to have a greater depth or like a greater extent of devotion, something that you will never have on their side of the house because of the inherent dilution of religion in the first place, right? I think then the reason that you prioritize like having devotion over the amount of people is because religion does essentially run on these like ideas of personhood in the first place, right? So you prioritize in religion every single individual and what their depth or the extent of their devotion to God is in the first place. It is inherently individualistic in that sense, right? But then in second place, we think that even since the beginning of time, you've always wanted devotion and commitment over the quantity of people, because that quantity of people is essentially only people that are mindless and tokenistic on their side of the house. Something I will be proving on later. Even in religions like Christianity, like Islam, organized religions, by the way, in whose interest it was to prioritize devotion over quantity, you had things like the seven disciples. You had things like the closest followers of the Prophet himself, right? This is because you prioritize devotion because you don't prioritize the quantity of followers in the first place. Especially now that you're living in the current status quo where you have amounted enough followers, but because of this increased globalized influence, we think it is then that your religion is getting diluted because you have too many influences from the outside external world, which is why it then becomes important to focus on your own individual practices and also how much you follow through with them in the first place, right? We think on their side of the house, you are way more likely to become relaxed. We think on their side of the house, you are way more likely to become complacent, which defeats the entire purpose that we've been trying to sell to you this entire time. Insofar as I've taken down the purpose of organized religion in the first place, which is to ensure that every single individual follower is doing their absolute best to be able to follow through with these principles in the first place in accordance with their capacity, I think we take this debate. Another very important clarification that I need to make, something they were again very disingenuous with. I think we told you that these core tenets cannot exist in absentia of these practices that we've been trying to sell to you. Because the reason for that being is that we don't think that these practices are unnecessary, but they're a test of your belief, essentially, right? Which is also the purpose of organized religion. My point is that this life is a test whereby you challenge your human capacity, you challenge your faith, etc., etc., and then the afterlife is incentivizing you because of the fact that there's this greater potential of a reward rather than the fear that most of us try to sell to you. We believe and buy into narratives that God is inherently merciful. So no matter what mistake I make, God will allow me to sort of like make up for it in the first place, right? We think then because of like merciful narratives like these, we think then because of narratives that accommodate the larger general mass, we think then it is because of that this is a test of your belief, right? But then why is this important? This is important because we think that you can't inherently buy into narratives like God is one. You can't buy into the narratives that they're talking about the core beliefs and the principles of Islam and other organized religions unless you put them into practice in your practical life in the first place, right? So unless I'm actively praying, unless I'm actively fasting, and I practice like these principles that they're talking about in the first place, I'm not likely to believe in them. I'm not likely to buy into them, right? But then at their absolute best case, let's say people still believe in these core tenets, right? Let's say people have this completely puritanical belief in these principles, like God is one, like my prophets and my angels, etc., etc. still think, even on their best case, the reason they can't win with that is because the inherent purpose of religion is still to test you. And the thing is, I then bring to you like this idea of human capacity and how all the practices that we're talking about in the motion aren't actually hard to do. For example, fasting, etc., is something your body is still equipped to do with biologically. It's just that these are things that you wouldn't do otherwise. These are things that you wouldn't do otherwise unless you were like told by your religion, right? Which is why we then think this emphasis is so important, is because it's what's driving you to test your limits, to test what you want to do. On their side, the house, the simple trade-off is, hey, I believe in God. I don't want to do Hajj because I want to go to Hawaii, right? I think that is the exact idea that literally Umar was trying to bring to you, right? About how essentially your basic principles as a believer then get diluted because you view the material, you give precedence to the material world over all the sacrifices that you have to make within this world. This is an idea that believers do inherently buy into in the first place, right? This is exactly why even in this globalized world where you have a multitude of influences influencing your decisions, influencing your complacency, the reason you still have devoted believers in USA, in globalized regions, in inherently westernized and anglicized places, is because you choose to enact these principles in the first place. Now that I have proven that very important link between your practices and your beliefs, the fact that you literally cannot have these beliefs if you don't have those practices, we think we already take this debate. But then, on like this idea of direction and guidance and also tokenism, something they never dealt with. I think then what's likely to happen on their side of the house, in my first clash on where there is more depth of devotion, I think then what's actually likely to happen is because of the fact that these people are not enacting these principles, they're likely to be tokenistic. That's what actually happens on their side of the house. I can go ahead and I can say to my community, hey guys, I think I do really believe in God. But insofar as I'm not enacting any of that, insofar as I'm not making any active sacrifices in my life to prove that I am actually devoted to God, that it isn't something that I can just say and get away with, I think then on our side of the house, you're likely to be more devoted and less tokenistic, right? But then thirdly, on this idea of direction and guidance, something that they never dealt with and also co-opts all the benefits that they were trying to bring about with apathetic believers. I think the reason like these apathetic people don't stand in the first place is because they're like literally unsubscribed to the ideology of religion in the first place. It's not that they detest the fact that you have principles. It's not the fact that they detest the fact that you have like the certain practices that you have to have within these religions, but that they don't believe in religion in the first place. We think what these apathetic, atheistic, or agnostic people are most likely to look like is the fact that they're likely to be aimless and directionless because they don't think that any religion or any ideology aligns with the principles that they align their life with. They don't find any belief system or value system that they want to walk like with in the first place, right? We then think that it is because of this lack of direction that religion is compensating for by actively giving you guidance, by telling you, hey, these are the principles you should follow. Hey, if you don't have a structure in life, maybe you can try out like reading your prayer 5 times a day, or you can try going to the church, etc. We think then we also co-opt the benefit of those agnostic people that they were talking about in the first place. Insofar as I've also given you precedence of success in globalized regions, we then take this debate. But then where's the essence of religion protected better, which is what the debate then lastly comes down to? We think on their side of the house, you're not testing the faith of these people anymore. You also have no accountability for these believers because they are left to their own devices. When you're not actively telling me that I have to pray 5 times a day, or there is no emphasis on this idea, I'm likely to be complacent. I'm likely to actually move further away from my religion, which is not in the interest of organized religion. We think they never dealt with this idea of fragmentation and sectarianism within religion, whereby where there is uncertainty on what we're supposed to do in a certain area of life, people are likely to exploit that, and then there is likely to be like this conflict of personal interest, which leads to fragmentation. Whereby when you actually follow principles that have been actively set out for you within the world by religion, we then think there's likely to be less fragmentation. Insofar as we've proven our burdens, why the devotion is better than quantity, and also where like organized religion is inherently better off, I think we then take this debate.
Thank the speaker for that fine speech. I'd now like to call upon the opposition reply speaker to take the floor.
Okay, I'm gonna keep my camera off because my net is a bit weak.
Okay.
I'll be start. Oh wait. Okay. I'll be starting my speech. Actually, give me 1 second. Okay. Sorry, I was fixing my net. I'll be starting my speech in three, two, one. At the point in time where they like ignore, where we call out their like mistakes at first and continue to run the same frame, I think they lost this debate. But three things I'll do for you, right? Four things I'll do for you. Firstly, tell you how they like clearly need to get a lesson in religion. Secondly, like comparative on like where stakeholders are being catered to better. Thirdly, a comparative on depth and scale, and then how like even in abstention of everything we still take this debate. What are like the four issues I then we then have with like the religious understanding? The idea that the entire like comparative is, oh, you need to like change the prioritization. I have like we've given you like a bunch of issues we have. Firstly, the fact that like their prioritization is just untrue, because at the point in time where their main example is Tawheed and the five pillars of Islam are Tawheed and everything else that we are saying, we think we still cater to this prioritization better because they're literally arguing our case. Tawheed and Rosa, all of these five pillars of Islam are something that go hand in hand. We think working for one means working for the other, but also then their idea, but also like we think that even if we take them at their best case and like by this idea we that like this prioritization is like different, we think you then dilute the essence of the religion. My whole line about dilution that they didn't cater to, why is that? Because then you're like spreading misinformation. These are core Islamic principles, they are core principles that you need to adhere to, that you need to be like working with and you need to be working towards in order to get the endpoint that is painting out, that is heaven or hell. We think in the point in time where you like dilute the essence of like the importance of this and try to reprioritize it, we think you then like we aren't okay with that, because A, you aren't bringing grounding, but B, you dilute the essence of the whole. My POI on this that they like didn't answer properly. But then the idea that like believe the link between beliefs and practices. What did we tell you? Three things. A, the idea that like you can't be forced into doing these practices, even if you're like doing it for value, that's still like a personal belief that you make. So you need to be like the person who actually decides to do this. You can't be forced into it. Secondly, the idea that these are things that go hand in hand. That's it, that belief and practices are linked. Practices can also build belief. Praying is something that builds belief. Rosa is something that builds your belief because you feel connected to God. Thirdly, and then secondly, the idea that like practice, that like they have an issue with like practice in the sense of like whether or not you have the capacity. This has already told you this. We've already been telling from the start that like we think that like depth and like doing this is something that is more important to these people than like whether they go to Hawaii or not. But then I think they need to like go to a madrasa. But then like there are ideas that they didn't like deal with. Firstly on like community, secondly on like dilution of religion, and then Aman's whole line about like extreme measures are important. When you take extreme measures, these people I feel like need to take extreme measures, sorry, because of the fact that you go away from religion and increase extreme experts. But then the comparatives, right? Firstly on individuals, where and they this is like their main stakeholder, apathetic individuals, where they're like, oh, these people feel otherized. Throughout the bench we've been telling that, hey, if these people are religious, they won't feel otherized, but even they won't feel otherized because their like main connection is to God and the people within the religion. And this is where like our idea of community became so important, because you have a sense of community. Even if you're feeling otherized with the rest of the world, community and coming to a place where you can talk about this becomes very important, because then you have like a connection, you have a sense of security. My whole line, they didn't deal with it, they didn't leave with it. But also the idea that people will leave because they don't have money to go to Hawaii or whatever, right? And this is like and this is like where like then like your personal religious commitments being painted out to you becomes so important. Because when I am being constantly like, because when you paint out the narrative and tell them why this is so important, you tell them that this is which divides heaven and hell. But also at the point in time where these people are logical human beings and are connected to this religion and want to go to heaven, we don't think they're going to prioritize going to Hawaii over going to Hajj because they want to go to heaven. This is like a prioritization that is, I think this is a really stupid line. But even if I buy it, I think like you telling them about this is still like enforcing it better. Secondly, where like these organized religions are catered to better, but and this is like and they only have like one idea, which is like you dilute the religion. I already told you why like they are diluting the religion more, but I think like simply on the basis that we like connect you to the religion, you are likely to stay like more like connected to these religion organizations. We give them more sense of community and connect them. But then like on depth and scale, right? We think, and this is like something that we've been running from the start, that depth is something that is very important, and like these religions like function on the basis of devotion. We then think when you like preserve the depth of this religion, then like maintain like and preserve the connection of the people who are connected to the religion, you have more depth. But also like scale, which isn't a big issue because you still have so many people who are in this religion. We still cater to scale better because you invite people to the religion at the point in time where you are connected, you are become like role models. But in absentia of everything, insofar as both like sides agree to the fact that like catering to the core principles is important, and we are the side that is telling the people why it's important, telling you that this is your endpoint, and creating accountability. We take this debate.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. I'd now like to invite the proposition reply speaker to take the floor.
Now audible.
Yes, audible and visible.
I'll start in three, two, one. They were really sneaky about the way they changed the frame of this debate because at first this debate was about the image of how organized movements presented themselves. And then this debate became about whether or not individuals are made aware that pillars of Islam or articles of faith, etc., exist. This is where we need to clarify, and we did already, the difference between being aware of something and being forced into doing something. Because insofar as being aware of a belief means that individuals on our side will still know that praying and fasting is a pillar of Islam, but you can take it step by step. You can maybe 1 month later start praying one time a day and take it step by step instead of having to go all in or being called a kafir and an inherently bad person. Then I think that that is the type of narrative we prefer because that decreased pressure leads to more buy-in. And I'm going to tell you why buy-in is more important. But before that, a really important clarification. The way that they framed these narratives are that you show individuals a really merciful and flowery picture of heaven and they buy into it out of their own choice. I don't necessarily think that's true because I think that the flowery picture they talk about is highly conditional. Insofar as you don't go all in and do all of these things regardless of your capacity to do them, then you are an inherently bad person that does not have access to all of these flowery images of heaven. But then let's talk about the two issues of this debate. One, the number of buy-in that you have for a religion and why that's so important. There were two sub-issues here. Firstly, for individuals already born in religious background, we told you that they're pushed so hard until they reach a particular breaking point. Insofar as individuals are forced to opt into every single granular detail of what their local religious leader tells them to do, or else they are an inherently bad person. I think that that incentivizes more individuals to leave. And they didn't give a proper response to this because they engage more on the idea of apathetic people that buy into the religion. So let's talk about what they said there. The problem with apathetic people is in the example that they gave with the United States. I think that's really interesting because religious leaders and leaders of organized religious movements in the United States don't enforce fasting and praying and things like that in the same way that they do in Pakistan. So I think that individuals, when they have the ability to choose to do these things out of their own goodwill, they feel that they're still retaining some of that control over their own life, and so they become more genuine followers of that religion. We think that that less buy-in inherently matters and is the most important part of this debate because a religion is compromised of its followers, right? Intuitively so. I think that all religions want to grow and all religions want to be even more in number because if you gave religious leaders the option to have, like, I don't know, two people believing in their religion versus 50 people, even if that meant that all of the 50 people weren't people that love doing it, I think they would still prefer the 50 because that gives the religion better optics, a better image, a religion that is growing. I think that's the most important issue of this debate, and that's why we win that. Second, then, the idea of depth of impact and the depth of followers. Their definition of a follower of a religion is someone that ticks off all the boxes of the prerequisites of doing a particular thing. We don't think that we want to define followers as those type of people because the intention for these individuals to be doing all of those actions simply isn't there. The idea of dilution is really interesting because insofar as these individuals don't necessarily always want to do these things out of their own free choice but are still doing it to act like essentially a person that is a part of that religious movement, we don't want these type of followers because we don't think that there is genuinity in those actions. The comparative here is really simple. Would you rather have someone that ticks off all the boxes, prays, fasts, does everything but does not genuinely want to do it? They do it because otherwise society will ostracize them, versus someone that takes a little more time to get around and get used to doing these things but is doing them out of their own free will. I think that the reason that we prefer the latter is because this is someone that follows your religion for the sake of the core principles of your religion, not because the rest of society told them to. I think that that's a better image for these religious movements as a whole. And lastly, the idea of exploitation was never dealt with because I gave you an argument on how religious leaders inherently have the room to change what these granular details look like. Because on the alternative, if you don't have so many granular details enforced onto local individuals, I think that that gives much less power to these local leaders to exploit that, to change that. I think that also brings in more people to the movement. But even in the absolute worst case, on their side of the house, the first exposure that you have to these movements is a trial that they are forced to go through, not something that they can opt into by themselves through their own intention. Given that those followers, even if they don't do all of these things immediately, are going to get around to it out of their own intention eventually, given that we have more followers, a greater buy-in on all those grounds, very clear proper.
Thank you for that fine speech, and thank you both teams for this very engaging debate. You can leave the breakout room because the decision is going to be announced in the main hall.